When it feels like the dark lingers longer than the night, when the shadows feel like giants, are you chasing me down? Tell me, where could I run from your light? Where could I hide? Hemmed within your precious thoughts, there's no hiding from your love. Highs and lows, Lord, you're with me either way it goes. Should I rise or should I fall? Even so, Lord, your mercy is an even flow. You're too good to let me go. Should I dance on the heights or make my bed among the depths? Your mercy waits at every end. Like a blended from the stars. Should the dawn come with wings or find me far side of the sea, there your hand still fastens me, even closer to your heart. Whoa, highs and lows, Lord, you're with me the way it goes. Should I rise or should I fall? Even so, Lord, your mercy is an even flow. Should I rise or should I fall? You are faithful through it all. You're too good to let me go. Highs and lows, Lord, you're with me the way it goes. You're too good to let me go.
Author James Joyce tells the story of the largeness of the soft falling snow covering all of Ireland in his book Dubliners. It's the last story. It's a story about the living and the dead. The story takes place on the 12th night after Christmas, circa 1914, into the morning of Epiphany. Epiphany is a Christian feast day, typically on January 6th, and primarily associated with the coming of the Magi to see the Christ. The Magi represent the light being manifested to the Gentiles, to the foreigners, to all the nations. We see the events through the eyes of Gabriel. He's attending his aunt's Epiphany dinner and dance where he will give a speech. There's conversation there about the piety of the monks at the monastery who sleep in their own coffins. There's singing and dancing and much food, a liveliness. But Gabriel has a cold, cold heart. Gabriel has a heart of stone. He's dead inside. He learns of the memory of Michael Fury, who died at age 17 of illness decades ago. Gabriel's epiphany is that sometimes the memory of the dead is more alive than the life of the living. The story ends with this observation by Gabriel. The snow was falling too upon every part of the lonely churchyard where Michael Fury lay buried. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead. Together it would seem as we all have the same fate. There's a strange unity here. Gabriel's sad epiphany is a vision of the unity of all things, how the snow falls universally on the living and the dead. There's a paradox. The memory of the dead seems more alive to Gabriel than he the living. There's a certain unity here. We consider this to be a universal problem. Gabriel needs to learn a new way to think different. Let me tell you another story about a woman confronted with a decision. Sometimes the powerless are very wise. Many years ago, a person who owed money could be thrown in prison. A man owed a great deal of money to a moneylender. The old moneylender wanted to trade this debt for the man's daughter, a practice in this old culture. He would cancel the debt if he could have the daughter instead. A proposal that was horrifying to the daughter and the father. The moneylender said Providence should decide this matter. He would put a black pebble and a white pebble taken from the path below their feet and put them in a bag. The daughter would pick out one pebble. If she chose the black pebble, she would become his wife. If she chose the white pebble, she would be free, and the debt would be cancelled. If she refused to take the pebble out, her father would be thrown in jail, and she would starve. The moneylender reached down to pick up 2 pebbles from the path. The sharp-eyed girl quietly noticed that he only picked out 2 black pebbles and no white pebble. Logically, there seemed to be 3 choices. Refuse to take the pebble. Tell that there were only 2 black pebbles, but this was dangerous. Take a black pebble and sacrifice yourself. She has to make a decision. Let's put this aside for the moment to think about, but think different. Don't think about the pebble that she's taking out of the bag, but the one she's leaving behind. Apple Computers once had an ad campaign simply entitled Think Different. It was about radical thinkers who have changed the world. First, let's think about a word, the word decision, from 2 Latin words. De, meaning off, sedere, to cut. Kind of means to cut off, cut loose, and jettison your cargo, cut down, or even to kill your enemies. It means to decide and divide, to leave behind. Now picture this, Jesus and his disciples, Jesus and his followers, many of them, multitudes. But don't picture them the way you usually picture them. Don't picture them seated with him, listening to his teaching, or standing around him. Picture them walking. Jesus is walking, and they are walking behind him. Because they are walking with him, they are present with him and learning from him. Let me say that again in a slightly different way. They decide to walk with him. They feel the presence of the Christ. They experience his love, and they are continually learning from him. But suddenly he stops and turns around to face them. This is what we might call the conversion of Jesus. Conversion means to turn around and face a different direction. He does that. He stops walking, abruptly turns around, and he confronts them. They need to make a decision. This is a story that Luke tells in only the way that Luke can tell it. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, verses 25 to 33, it's a very different story. The story reads this way. Now large crowds were traveling with Jesus. He turned to them and told them, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father, mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, as well as his own life, he can't be my disciple. Whoever doesn't carry his cross and follow me can't be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. He will first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough money to finish it, won't he? Otherwise, if he lays a foundation and can't finish the building, everyone who watches will begin to ridicule him and say, This person started a building but couldn't finish it. Or suppose a king is going to war against another king. He will first sit down and consider whether, with 10,000 men, he can fight the one coming against him with 20,000 men, won't he? If he can't, he will send a delegation to ask for terms of peace while the other king is still far away. In the same way, none of you can be my disciple unless he gives up all of his possessions. We should notice that Jesus is describing an action. It's about coming to him. That's exactly what they've done. That's pretty easy. We call that Christianity. But we have the conversion of Jesus, a confrontation, and then he adds these conditions. He adds 3 conditions using the same phrase repeatedly. First, you cannot be my disciple unless you hate your own father, mother, brother, sister, even your own life. Secondly, you cannot be my disciple unless you carry your own cross. And lastly, you cannot be my disciple unless you give up all your own possessions. 3 verbs: hate, carry, give up. Here's the problem. The cost is high and hard. Who can possibly do this? Let me say a word about the context of this text, because that's just easier to maybe put it aside as well. Here's some fast facts about the gospel that Luke writes. Luke is responsible for the largest body of writings in the New Testament in Luke Acts, even more than Paul. He's the only New Testament writer who's not a Jew. He writes to one person, one single person, Theophilus. He calls him most excellent Theophilus, meaning he's probably a high-ranking Roman. So he's probably a patron, Theophilus is patron, a sponsor of Luke's writing. Luke is fact-checking the story for Theophilus. Jesus is a Jewish rabbi named Yeshua or Joshua, but Luke does not call him a rabbi. He calls him master. That's because Luke is speaking to foreigners. Luke does not trace Jesus' genealogy to Abraham, but to Adam, connecting the genealogy to all humans. There's a special recognition in Luke of women and racial outsiders, the poor and the outcast. So Jesus is on a mission to Jerusalem. Luke Acts pivots on the ascension in Jerusalem. In Luke it is to Jerusalem. In Acts it is from Jerusalem to Rome, the world. There is no such thing as what we call Christianity at this point. In this passage, it does not exist. There are only disciples of Christ. There is one people of God, one mission, the same one as Adam and Eve have. Be fruitful and multiply. But it was no longer just the family, but to the nations, to all the world. So Luke's gospel is an epiphany. An epiphany is when something is revealed by having light shed upon it. He joins the narrative of the Jewish rabbi to the one of the healer of all the nations. This is a unification of the people of God, a turning, a conversion to the inclusion of all people. The great crowds were following Jesus on the way to overthrow the evil empire, but he was on his way to an execution. To repeat, the mission was to overthrow death universally. There's a conversion of the mission to include all foreigners and outsiders. We are those foreigners. Luke writes his gospel with a central 10-chapter narrative about Jesus walking to Jerusalem. Jesus is on a mission to go to Jerusalem. Luke spends 10 chapters, half his book almost, repeatedly mentioning this and detailing it. So Yeshua the Messiah, the Christ, will not deliver people from their political oppressors. This is not a Make Israel Great Again campaign. He has a plan for his followers, one that conquers death and brings life. Luke is writing about both the living and the dead. Jesus turns his face with a resolve again towards Jerusalem. So then the question becomes, will you continue walking given the conditions and the cost? How is this even possible? This is about deciding and dividing. To be sure, Jesus is challenging your family values, your possessions, and your religion. But think about those three conditions again. First, the idea of hating your family. This is probably spoken in Aramaic and actually emphasizes the idea of putting something aside. Put that aside and keep it in mind for a moment. Secondly, be willing to set aside your life to carry the cross. That is, set aside something, put it down to pick up something else. You need to decide what that is for you. Lastly, renounce all your possessions. Say farewell to them. Think about that word, farewell. I wish the best for you. If you read your Strong's Concordance, Strong's did a lot of work on understanding the Greek words. Here's what he'd tell you here. That this renunciation, to renounce, means to bid adieu. What does adieu mean? It's French for the idea of to God. Adieu, adieu my family, my life, my possessions. I commend these things to God because I care. And I put them aside for the more important thing. We usually see this text as a problem, a cost, and not a benefit. This is not a sacrifice, but a gain. This is not merely about how you cannot be my disciple, but how you can be a disciple, a follower. You bid adieu to everything, everyone, everybody. I want you to fare well. I commend you to God. Jesus tells you how. It has no longer come towards me. It has now come behind me. You decide to keep on walking. So count the cost, but also count the benefit. The benefits of being a follower and of walking together. The first benefit is continued learning. Secondly, you will live in the presence of God, we the living. Thirdly, you will feel the love of Jesus. So I commend all these other things. I bid adieu because I love the Master more. I can choose to walk with gravity, or I can choose to walk with levity. I can see the cost, or I can see the benefit. This is about life. Let's return to the story of the young woman who had to make a decision. Sometimes the powerless are wise. She had an epiphany, that moment when light shines upon and reveals. She decided that the wicked moneylender is not going to be her master. She is wiser than he. She knows both pebbles are black. When she pulls the one out of the moneylender's bag, she fumbles and drops it onto the path below. They no longer know which one is the pebble. And so she says, "It does not matter. We know the color of the pebble which fell because it is supposed to be different than the one that remains in the bag." She knows the pebble in the bag is black. She says, "Therefore, I must have chosen the white pebble." The moneylender is caught in his own game. The wise young woman gains her freedom, and freedom from debt for her father. She decided to think different. She chose wisely. She chose life. What or who is confronting you in the path before you? What is it that you have to decide? So Jesus turns around again and begins walking towards Jerusalem with resolve. He still speaks to us today about how we can be his disciples, his followers. So this year, think different. Have an epiphany. Decide to follow. On a mission, be a bringer of light. And think about this. It's so simple. If we continue to follow him, we remain in his presence. If we stand still, he continues on his way. Then we are no longer in his presence, and we are only worshiping a memory.